One is that we seem to be educating a lot of people more than what is actually necessary for the jobs that they ultimately end up doing. So this is a chart, one of several that I'll show you from Vetter's book, showing that the education requirements of occupations held by college graduates are almost half less than a college education. That is, you could do that job with a high school diploma or less, or maybe some college but not a 4-year degree. So we're over-educating for the kinds of work that people are doing. Here you see the number of jobs requiring a college degree versus the number of college graduates. On the left there you have the jobs requiring a college degree, 28.6 million. The number of employed college graduates, 41.7 million. We've got a lot of people who are in the workforce with a college degree that did not need a college degree to do what they are doing. We keep churning out more and more of these college graduates for what exactly? And here's what some of them are doing. And by the way, let me just issue a caveat here. This is not a you should drop out of college speech, okay? I'm not saying that this process doesn't make sense for some people. I'm suggesting that this doesn't make sense for as many people as are actually going through the process, okay? So here we have taxi drivers, shipping and receiving clerks, sales clerks, firefighters, carpenters, bank tellers. In 1970, that's the dark bar or column there, you had very, very few taxi drivers, shipping and receiving clerks, firefighters, carpenters, etc., who were college graduates. That's 50 years ago. In 2010, 40 years later, we have enormous numbers of people who are doing these jobs that don't require bachelor's degrees that have, in fact, gone through an expensive 4-year process. So, Vetter thinks about, why is this? Why are we spending so many resources? Why are we encouraging people? Why are guidance counselors in high schools encouraging students to go to college when in fact this may not be necessary for many of them? Part of it is a kind of an overbidding. If you are a fast food, maybe not a fast food restaurant, but you're some kind of restaurant and you're looking for employees, and you get 100 applications for a job, and you're trying to filter through the applications. Well, one easy filter is who's got more education. And just throw out all the ones that have less than high school education, even though less than high school might still be perfectly fine for the kind of job that you're hiring for. So maybe part of this is just it's a filtering process from the employer standpoint. You don't really need to have somebody who's got an anthropology degree to be able to manage the Panera Bread Company, but well, we need a manager, and this person here has the 4-year degree, so we're going to take that as a signal that this person is a go-getter to some extent, because they could stick with this 4-year project of getting a college degree, and even though the subject matter is completely irrelevant to what we need this person to do, at least it demonstrates this person has some stick-to-itiveness. They can stick to a long-term project, carry it out. They probably are literate. They have some skills that we think might be important for being a manager. We know this just because they've got this certificate that says they went through this process. It also means this person is able to show up on time, at least somewhat, although I can tell you as a college professor, not all of my students have that skill. So here's what college education might be doing. It's a filter to some extent, and to the extent that we're not actually conveying knowledge. And I like to think, maybe I'm deluding myself, but I like to think we're conveying knowledge too. But it's a filter, at least in part. So you have the population, general population, and some of these have have red characteristics, some of them have blue characteristics. This is not political, red states and blue states kind of thing. This is just different characteristics. I think the way I'd set this up, the blues are people who are motivated, who are persevering, who are intelligent. The reds are people who are not so motivated. They're rather undisciplined with the use of their time. Maybe their intelligence is not so great. So you've got these two groups in the general population. So some of them end up going into this filtering process, this filter for motivation, perseverance, and intelligence, and they either pass or fail. Either they get filtered out or they pass through the filter. So those who pass are being certified as motivated, persevering, and intelligent. And now some people may get through the filter that are not, in fact, motivated, persevering, and intelligent, but it does at least help someone who doesn't know anything about the job applicant in front of them to know something about whether this person is more likely or less likely to be motivated. Some people fail the filter. Now, Bill Gates dropped out of college too. Doesn't mean he was unmotivated or unintelligent or anything. I mean, he quit and he had better opportunities. There's nothing necessarily wrong with making that decision to drop out of college. People regard that as being you failed something, but when I say you fail or drop out, that's not necessarily saying anything about your character or your abilities. There are other people that bypass the filter completely. We used to have a lot more people that just bypassed the filter. They said, well, I've got enough motivation, intelligence, and so forth to make it on my own without having to go through this certification process to prove, or at least to indicate that I've got this set of characteristics. So this is the way the system might work if it is about signaling, but what we've seen happen, especially since World War II, but in several instances since then, the government has injected large sums of money. One of the first injections from the federal government was the so-called GI Bill. And this injection of federal money began to alter this system. It changed the incentives. So it taxes people, and then it subsidizes those who decide to enter the filtering process. So the filter becomes less effective. If you can imagine in a kind of an engineering or hydraulic sense, you put a lot of pressure of air or water going through an air or water filter, you're going to get a lot more stuff that gets kind of forced through that you don't really want to be forced through. So you maybe get a lot of people who end up passing the filter who are not actually motivated, persevering, and intelligent, but nevertheless they get certified as such. And the colleges and universities are incentivized to pass these people through, at least to some extent. You fail that person out, you no longer get those tax subsidized tuition payments. And colleges especially colleges that are very enrollment driven, which many of them are, you lose that enrollment, you lose that student, and you lose that tuition payment. So colleges have an incentive to bend over backwards to get this person to stick around, and maybe they're one of those people that stays around an extra year or something, but we're going to try to get that person through because that person has federally subsidized or state subsidized dollars. And the only way to get those dollars is to keep that person enrolled as a student. I realize this is a cynical perspective, but bear with me. Of course, you're used to this kind of thing. Fewer people end up trying to bypass the filter because now the people who are at the margin otherwise would say, I don't have much to gain by trying to go through this filtering process. Now, because they are not having to pay the full cost, they end up going into the filter. Brian Kaplan wrote a book on this kind of thing a couple of years ago, saying once workers have been ranked, giving everyone extra years of education is socially wasteful. Furthermore, since the status quo is supported by hundreds of billions of dollars of subsidies, we are probably underusing alternative certification methods like apprenticeships, testing, boot camps, and so on. Some of you are getting a certification. coming to Mises U. I saw some of you with certificates that indicated that you had gone through Judge Napolitano's course here. That's an alternative certification mechanism. But federal and state subsidies discourage people from seeking out those alternative certifications and encourage them to go through this kind of process that I described. Kaplan says, signaling explains why students are far more concerned about grades than actual learning. They want easy A's, not professors who teach lots of job skills. Signaling explains why cheating pays. A successful cheater profits by impersonating a good student, and signaling explains why students readily forget course material the day after the final exam. Once you've got the good signal on your transcript, you can usually safely forget whatever you learned. So Kaplan says we don't need as much education, and I would substitute the word schooling here. We don't need as much schooling as people actually are pursuing. He says the cleanest way to get far less education or schooling is to sharply cut government education spending. Employers will no longer expect you to have the education you can no longer afford. In other words, spending cuts will cause credential deflation. You'll again be able to get a low and middle skill job with a high school degree or less. My maternal grandfather had an 8th grade education, and he did fine. He provided for his family with 3 kids. They did all right. He grew up without a lot of wealth. His family was Alabama tenant farmers who had grown cotton in rural Alabama for years and years, actually lost a lot of money in the Great Depression, essentially lost the farm in the Great Depression. He got an 8th grade education and went to work. And at that time, it was not nearly as uncommon for someone to be able to do that.